Congratulations. You've been hired as a wedding singer. Not exactly what you put on your vision board as a kid, right? But here we are. The pay's decent when the gigs come in, the hours are, well, they're nights and weekends mostly. And somebody's got to provide the soundtrack to people's happiest moments. My name is Sarah, and I've been working the wedding circuit in the Pacific Northwest for about 3 years now. 3 years of Here Comes the Bride. At last, and whatever current pop song the couple insists will be their song forever. 3 years of drunk uncles requesting Sinatra and bridesmaids crying during the slow dances. But before I tell you what you're really signing up for, let me give you some context. Because if you're smart, and I hope you are for both our sakes, you'll want to understand exactly what this job can entail. I got into weddings singing the way most musicians do, through desperation and a Craigslist ad. My band had just broken up. My day job at the record store barely covered rent, and I had a decent voice that people said was perfect for special occasions. The ad was simple. Vocalist needed for established wedding entertainment company. Professional demeanor required. Must be comfortable performing solo and with accompaniment. Extensive repertoire preferred. What they didn't mention was the other requirements. The ones you only learn on the job. I started with Harmony Events, a mid-sized company run by a woman named Patricia who'd been in the business for 15 years. She had that polished, professional smile that never quite reached her eyes, and she treated wedding entertainment like military logistics. Listen, honey, she told me during my interview, this isn't about your artistic vision. This is about reading a room, following directions, and making sure the bride gets exactly what she wants. You can be creative on your own time. Fair enough. I needed the money. Patricia paired me with Marcus, their lead guitarist and unofficial mentor for new vocalists. Marcus was in his 40s, had perfect pitch, and the kind of stage presence that could make Happy Birthday sound like Carnegie Hall material. First rule, Marcus told me as we set up for my first gig, the bride is always right. Second rule, if the bride changes her mind, see Rule 1. Third rule, if something feels wrong, and I mean really wrong, not just awkward family dynamics wrong, you find me immediately. I thought he was talking about bridezillas and open bars. I was wrong. My first few months were exactly what you'd expect. Outdoor ceremonies where the wind kept blowing sheet music away. Reception halls with acoustics that made everything sound like it was performed inside a tin can. Mothers of the bride who insisted their special requests were traditional, when they were clearly something they'd heard on reality TV. Standard wedding singer problems. The venues were typical Pacific Northwest fare. Vineyards in the Columbia River Gorge. Historic hotels in downtown Portland. Beach resorts on the Oregon coast. Mountain lodges with views that made you forget you were working. Each venue had its own personality, its own challenges. Some had stages. Some had us performing in corners next to the DJ booth. Some wanted us to roam through the crowd with portable mics like we were buskers with a marriage license. But they all had one thing in common. They all had rules about certain songs. At first, I thought it was just venue policy. The Riverside Ballroom had a list of inappropriate selections posted in their bridal suite. The Mountain View Lodge had a clause in their contract about culturally insensitive material. The Historic Paramount had a whole binder of songs that were not suitable for family events. Standard stuff, I figured. Every venue has songs they don't want played. It wasn't until my 4th month that I started noticing the patterns. The first incident happened at a wedding in late September. Beautiful outdoor ceremony at a vineyard in the Willamette Valley. The bride, Jessica, was a music teacher who'd provided us with a detailed playlist for every part of the event. Ceremony music, cocktail hour jazz, dinner selections, and dancing music carefully organized by decade and genre. Everything was going perfectly until the reception dinner. Jessica approached our setup area during a break between courses, slightly flushed from champagne and excitement. "Sarah," she said, "I know this wasn't on the list, but could you sing The Water is Wide? It was my grandmother's favorite song, and she passed away last year. I thought it would be a nice tribute. I knew the song, a traditional folk ballad, beautiful and melancholy. Perfect for a memorial moment." "Of course," I said. "That's a lovely tribute." But when I mentioned it to Marcus, his expression changed immediately. "Not here," he said quietly. "Check the venue restrictions." I pulled out the contract. Sure enough, buried in the fine print, The Water is Wide was listed under prohibited selections. Why would they ban a folk song? I asked. Marcus looked uncomfortable. Every venue has its reasons. We don't ask. We just follow the rules. I had to tell Jessica we couldn't perform her grandmother's song. She was disappointed but understanding. Venues have policies, after all. But something about Marcus's reaction stuck with me. It wasn't just professional compliance. It was something else. Something like worry. After the wedding, I started paying more attention to those restricted song lists. Every venue had them, and while most were predictable, explicit lyrics, controversial themes, overly religious content, some included songs that seemed completely innocent. Danny Boy was banned at the Riverside Ballroom. Scarborough Fair was prohibited at Mountain View Lodge. The historic Paramount wouldn't allow Black is the Color of My True Love's Hair. All beautiful, traditional songs. All seemingly harmless. I started asking other musicians about it. The answers were always vague. Old policies, they'd say. Legal issues. Family requests. Insurance requirements. Nobody wanted to elaborate. It wasn't until November that I found out why. I was performing at a wedding at the Coastal Winds Resort, a sprawling complex built on a bluff overlooking the Pacific. The bride, Amanda, was a folklore professor at Portland State, and she'd requested a playlist heavy on traditional American and Celtic music. The ceremony went beautifully. The cocktail hour was smooth. Dinner service was flawless. But during the dancing portion of the evening, Amanda approached our stage with a request. "Sarah, I know this is last minute, but would you mind singing She Moved Through the Fair? It's an old Irish ballad. My great-aunt used to sing it, and she's here tonight. She's 93, and this might be her last wedding." I glanced at Marcus, who immediately started shaking his head. "It's not on the approved list," he said. "Can we check?" I asked. "It's for a 93-year-old woman." Marcus reluctantly pulled out the venue contract. She Moved Through the Fair was explicitly listed under prohibited selections. Amanda was persistent. "It's just a folk song about a man dreaming of his dead fiancée. It's sad, but it's not inappropriate." "Ma'am," Marcus said carefully, "the venue has very specific policies about certain traditional songs. We can't override those policies." "But why?" Amanda pressed. What possible reason could there be? That's when the venue coordinator appeared beside us. Patricia Chun, a thin woman in her 50s who'd been working at Coastal Winds for over a decade. "Is there a problem?" she asked with the kind of smile that wasn't really a question. Amanda explained her request. Patricia's expression immediately grew serious. "Absolutely not," she said. "That song is strictly prohibited at this venue." "But why?" Amanda asked again. Patricia looked at Marcus, then at me, then back at Amanda. "Because the last time someone performed that song here, the bride disappeared during her own reception." The words hung in the air like smoke. "What do you mean, disappeared?" Amanda asked. "I mean, she walked out onto the beach during the song and was never seen again," Patricia said quietly. "That was 8 years ago. The family still comes by every year on the anniversary, hoping she'll come back." Amanda stared at her. That can't be related to a song." Patricia shrugged. "Maybe not, but we're not taking any chances. Choose something else." Amanda eventually selected a different song, but the conversation stayed with me for the rest of the evening. After we'd packed up our equipment, I cornered Marcus. "Is that true?" I asked. "About the bride who disappeared?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment. Her name was Elena Vasquez. Beautiful wedding, 300 guests. The singer performed She Moved Through the Fair as a special request. Elena was dancing with her new husband when the song started. Halfway through, she stopped dancing, walked outside, and was never seen again. "People don't just disappear because of songs," I said. "No," Marcus agreed. "They don't. But Elena did, and she's not the only one." That night, Marcus told me about the others. A bride in Salem who vanished after requesting the unquiet grave at her reception. They found her wedding dress on the banks of the Willamette River. Her body was never recovered. A groom in Eugene who disappeared during Gloomy Sunday. A song with such a dark reputation that most venues ban it automatically. He was found 3 days later in his hotel room, appearing to have died in his sleep despite being in perfect health. A wedding party in Astoria where the entire bridal party went missing after an impromptu performance of The Dreadful Wind and Rain. The venue was searched for hours. They were found the next morning on a beach 30 miles away, with no memory of how they'd gotten there. "It's always traditional songs," Marcus explained, particularly the old ones. Folk ballads, murder ballads, songs about death and loss and supernatural themes. Nobody knows why, but there's a pattern. "How long has this been going on?" As long as I've been in this business. Probably longer. The venue restrictions aren't arbitrary. They're protective measures based on actual incidents. Why doesn't anyone talk about this publicly? Marcus looked at me like I was naive. Because who would believe it? And more importantly, who would hire us if they thought wedding singers could somehow cause supernatural incidents? So we just go along with it? We follow the rules, Marcus said. We stick to the approved lists. We don't take requests for traditional ballads unless they've been specifically cleared. And if something feels wrong during a performance, we stop immediately. How do you know if something feels wrong? Marcus was quiet for a moment. You'll know, he said finally. When it happens, you'll know. He was right. The incident that changed everything happened on a cold January evening at the Willow Creek Manor, a restored Victorian mansion about an hour outside Portland. The venue was gorgeous. All hardwood floors and crystal chandeliers and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over snow-covered gardens. The bride, Catherine, was an opera singer who'd requested a sophisticated musical program heavy on classical pieces and art songs. Her playlist was carefully curated, and every song had been pre-approved by both the venue and our company. Everything went perfectly through the ceremony and dinner. But during the dancing portion of the evening, Catherine approached our stage with a handwritten piece of sheet music. "Sarah," she said, "I know this is unusual, but I found this song in my grandmother's music collection after she passed away last month. It's called The Maiden's Lament, and I'd love to perform it myself as a tribute to her memory. Would you mind providing backup vocals?" I looked at the sheet music. It was old, genuinely old, with yellowed paper and notation in faded ink. The melody line was beautiful, haunting, written in a minor key that suggested Celtic or Appalachian origins. "It's lovely," I said, "but I'd need to check with venue management about adding songs that aren't on the approved list." Catherine's face fell. "It's just for my family. My grandmother would have wanted me to sing it." Marcus appeared beside me, drawn by the conversation. He glanced at the sheet music and immediately shook his head. "Ma'am, we can't perform any music that hasn't been pre-approved," he said diplomatically. "But it's a family song," Catherine insisted. "My grandmother wrote it herself. It's not even published. That should have been the end of it." But Catherine was persuasive, and it was her wedding day, and she was offering to sing it herself rather than requesting we learn it. Marcus reluctantly agreed to provide guitar accompaniment while Catherine performed solo. We should have checked with venue management. We should have insisted on following protocol. We should have trusted the rules that had been put in place for reasons we were only beginning to understand. Instead, we set up for an impromptu performance. Catherine took the microphone and announced to her guests that she wanted to honor her grandmother with a special song. The wedding party gathered around the stage area, champagne glasses in hand, smiling expectantly. Marcus began the guitar introduction based on the chord progression notated on the sheet music. The melody was indeed beautiful, mournful and ethereal, with a quality that seemed to reach directly into your chest and pull at something fundamental. Catherine began to sing. Her voice was extraordinary, classically trained, perfectly controlled, with a richness that filled the entire ballroom. The lyrics were about a young woman waiting for her love to return from war, growing older and more desperate as the seasons passed, eventually dying alone of grief. Standard folk ballad territory. Sad, but not unusual for traditional music. But something was wrong. I felt it first in the air around the stage. A change in temperature, subtle but distinct. The room grew colder as Catherine sang, and the sound of her voice began to expand. Not louder, exactly, but deeper. More resonant, as if the song was being amplified by something other than our sound system. Marcus felt it too. I could see him watching the guests instead of his guitar, his expression growing concerned. The wedding party was changing. It started with their faces. The smiles faded first, replaced by expressions of profound sadness. Then tears, not the happy tears you sometimes see at weddings, but genuine grief. Real sorrow, as if they were all experiencing actual loss. But they couldn't seem to stop listening. Catherine continued singing, apparently unaware of the effect her performance was having on the guests. Her eyes were closed, lost in the music, honoring her grandmother's memory with every note. The ballroom grew colder. The lights began to dim, though no one was touching the controls. And then I saw her. Standing at the back of the ballroom, just inside the doorway, was an elderly woman in a 1940s-style dress. She was translucent, visible but not solid, watching Catherine's performance with an expression of infinite sadness. She was mouthing the words to the song. I grabbed Marcus's arm and nodded toward the back of the room. He followed my gaze and immediately stopped playing. The moment the guitar accompaniment ceased, Catherine's eyes snapped open. The spell, or whatever it was, broke immediately. The guests blinked and shook their heads as if waking from a dream. The temperature returned to normal. The lights brightened, and the elderly woman at the back of the room was gone. What happened? Catherine asked, confused. Why did you stop? Before either of us could answer, the venue coordinator appeared at our side. Margaret Holloway, who'd been working at Willow Creek Manor for 20 years and had the kind of no-nonsense demeanor that suggested she'd seen everything. What song was that? She asked quietly. Catherine showed her the sheet music. Margaret's expression grew very serious as she examined the handwritten notation. Where did you get this? It was my grandmother's. She wrote it herself. Margaret studied the music for a long moment, then looked at Catherine with something like pity. Honey, she said gently, your grandmother didn't write this song. This is the Maiden's Lament. It's at least 200 years old, and it's on every restricted list in the state. That's impossible, Catherine said. I found it in her personal collection. Your grandmother may have transcribed it, Margaret said, but she didn't compose it. This song has a history, a very specific, very dangerous history. What kind of history? Margaret looked at Marcus and me, then back at Catherine. The kind where people who perform it start seeing things, hearing things. The kind where brides disappear from their own receptions. Catherine stared at her. That's ridiculous. Maybe, Margaret said, but we're not taking any chances. No more impromptu performances tonight. Stick to your approved playlist. Catherine wanted to argue, but her new husband appeared at her side, having noticed the commotion. After a brief explanation, he gently convinced her to let it go. It was their wedding night, after all. There would be other opportunities to honor her grandmother's memory, but the incident stayed with me. After the wedding, I did some research into the Maiden's Lament. What I found was disturbing. The song appeared to be genuinely old, possibly dating back to the early 1800s. It had emerged from the Appalachian folk tradition, where it was sometimes called the Waiting Song or the Widow's Ballad. More importantly, it had a documented history of supernatural incidents. A music teacher in Kentucky had disappeared after teaching the song to her students in 1923. A folk singer in Virginia had died of apparent heart failure while performing it in 1967, despite being young and healthy. A wedding in Tennessee had ended in tragedy when the bride threw herself from a hotel balcony after requesting the song in 1989. The pattern was always the same. The song would be performed, strange phenomena would occur, and someone would disappear or die under unexplained circumstances. Most disturbing of all, witnesses consistently reported seeing the same figure during these incidents. An elderly woman in 1940s clothing, watching the performance with profound sadness. The woman I'd seen at Catherine's wedding. I brought my research to Marcus, who listened with the weary expression of someone who'd heard similar stories before. There are dozens of songs like this, he told me. Traditional ballads, folk songs, particularly the old murder ballads. Most of them have some kind of supernatural history. That's why the venue restrictions exist. But why? What makes certain songs dangerous? Nobody knows for sure, Marcus said. There are theories. Some people think traditional songs carry emotional imprints from the people who sang them over generations. Others believe that songs about death and loss can somehow resonate with spirits who experienced similar trauma. And you believe this? Marcus was quiet for a moment. I believe that music is more powerful than most people realize. I believe that some songs have been around long enough to accumulate energy. And I believe that when those songs are performed in the right circumstances, by someone with the right voice, they can open doors that are supposed to stay closed. Doors to what? To the past. To places where grief lives. To the space between what was and what should have been. That conversation marked a turning point in my career. I stopped thinking of the venue restrictions as arbitrary policies and started seeing them as protective measures against something I didn't fully understand but had witnessed firsthand. I became more careful about requests, more attentive to the atmosphere during performances, more aware of the line between entertaining guests and accidentally summoning something we couldn't control. But being careful wasn't always enough. The incident that nearly ended my career happened 6 months later at the most prestigious venue in our rotation, the Grand Cascade Hotel, a luxury resort built around a series of natural waterfalls in the Columbia River Gorge. The bride, Isabella, was the daughter of a prominent Portland family. Her wedding was a major social event, with over 400 guests and a budget that allowed for every possible luxury. Isabella had hired us specifically because of my growing reputation for handling sophisticated musical requests. She wanted a performance that would be unforgettable, her exact words. She should have been more careful what she wished for. The wedding was planned for peak autumn, when the gorge is at its most spectacular. Fall colors, crisp air, the sound of rushing water creating a natural soundtrack for the entire event. Isabella's musical requests were elegant and refined. Classical pieces for the ceremony, jazz standards for cocktail hour, contemporary hits for dancing. Nothing on any restricted list. Nothing that raised any red flags. The ceremony was flawless. The cocktail hour was sophisticated. Dinner service was impeccable. It was during the parent dances that things began to go wrong. Isabella had requested "The Way You Look Tonight" for her dance with her father. A classic choice, perfectly safe, performed at thousands of weddings without incident. But halfway through the song, I began to notice something odd about the acoustics in the ballroom. My voice was echoing. Not the normal reverb you'd expect from a large space, but something else. As if my voice was being repeated back by someone else, someone I couldn't see. At first, I thought it was a technical issue. Feedback from the sound system, maybe, or interference from the hotel's communication equipment. But as I continued singing, the echo became more distinct. It wasn't just a repetition of my voice, it was a harmony. Someone else was singing along, providing a counterpoint melody that wasn't in the original arrangement. I looked at Marcus, who was frowning at his guitar as if it wasn't producing the sounds he was playing. The backup keyboardist looked equally confused. But the harmony continued, growing stronger and more complex as the song progressed. The guests didn't seem to notice. Isabella and her father continued their dance, smiling and laughing, lost in their moment. The other guests watched with the kind of teary-eyed appreciation you always see during parent dances. But I could see the hotel staff looking around nervously, trying to locate the source of the additional voices. Because by then, it wasn't just one harmony. It was multiple voices, creating a full choral arrangement around my solo performance. Voices that were coming from empty air. I finished the song as quickly as I could without being obvious about it. The moment the music stopped, the mysterious harmonies ceased as well. What the hell was that? Marcus asked quietly as we transitioned to the next number. I have no idea, I said. Equipment malfunction? But I knew it wasn't equipment. The additional voices had been too clear, too musical, too intentional to be electronic interference. They'd been real voices, just not voices belonging to anyone present. The rest of the evening proceeded normally until the final hour of the reception. Isabella approached the stage for one last special request. Sarah, she said, slightly breathless from dancing. I know this is unusual, but I'd love to end the evening with something my great-grandmother used to sing. It's called Drowning the Sorrow. She used to perform it at family gatherings when I was little. I'd never heard of the song, which should have been my first warning sign. Do you have the sheet music? I asked. Isabella nodded and handed me a photocopied page. The notation was simple, the melody straightforward. The lyrics were about a woman who lost her love in a drowning accident and spent the rest of her life walking the riverbank, singing to his spirit. Standard tragic folk ballad material. But something about the melody felt familiar in a way that made my skin prickle. This song, I said carefully, is it published? Where did it originate? It's been in our family for generations, Isabella said. My great-grandmother learned it from her grandmother. I think it might be from Ireland originally, but I'm not sure. I showed the sheet music to Marcus, who examined it with growing concern. This needs to be cleared with hotel management, he said. Isabella's face fell. It's the last song of the evening. It means so much to my family. It'll just take a minute, I assured her. But when we found the hotel's event coordinator, Patricia Moreau, her reaction was immediate and alarmed. Absolutely not, she said the moment she saw the sheet music. This song is banned at every venue in the Northwest. Why? Isabella asked. Patricia looked uncomfortable. Because it's not just about drowning. It's about calling to the drowned. And this hotel is built next to moving water. What does that mean? Patricia glanced around to make sure no other guests were listening, then spoke quietly. It means that the last time someone performed this song near the Columbia River, 3 people drowned trying to answer the call they thought they heard in the music. Isabella stared at her. That's impossible. Maybe, Patricia said. But we're not risking it. Choose something else. Isabella was disappointed, but agreed to end the evening with a safer selection. We performed at last as a final dance number, and the wedding concluded without further incident. But as we were packing up our equipment, I overheard a conversation between two of the hotel's maintenance staff. "Did you hear that sound during the parent dances?" one asked. "The extra singing?" "Yeah, I heard it. Sounded like it was coming from the waterfall." "That's what I thought too. Like there were people singing out there in the water." They moved on before I could ask any follow-up questions, but their words stayed with me. People singing in the water. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about the mysterious harmonies during The Way You Look Tonight, about Isabella's family song that had been banned for safety reasons, about the maintenance workers who'd heard singing coming from the waterfall, about the pattern that was becoming impossible to ignore. The next morning, I called Marcus and told him I needed to understand what we were really dealing with. "I've been doing this job for 3 years," I said, "and I've seen enough weird things to know they're not coincidences. I need to know what we're actually up against." Marcus was quiet for a long moment. "Are you sure? Once you know the whole truth, you can't unknow it. And it might change how you feel about this job." "I need to know." Marcus sighed. "Meet me for coffee this afternoon. There are some people you should talk to." That afternoon, Marcus introduced me to the Pacific Northwest Folk Music Preservation Society, a group that sounded innocuous but was actually a network of musicians, historians, and researchers who documented supernatural incidents related to traditional music. The society met monthly in the back room of a used bookstore in Southeast Portland. The members included university professors, folk musicians, wedding performers like Marcus and myself, and a few people whose exact qualifications were unclear, but who seemed to know more about the supernatural aspects of traditional music than anyone had a right to. The meeting I attended was focused specifically on problematic songs, traditional ballads and folk songs that had documented histories of supernatural incidents. Dr. Elizabeth Hartwell, a folklore professor at Portland State, served as the group's unofficial leader. She'd been researching supernatural music incidents for over 20 years, and she had theories about why certain songs seemed to act as catalysts for unexplained phenomena. "Traditional songs are different from modern compositions," she explained. "They've been passed down orally for generations, sung by thousands of people across hundreds of years. They accumulate emotional weight. They become repositories for collective human experience, particularly the experiences of loss, grief, and longing. But why do some songs cause incidents while others don't?" I asked. "It seems to depend on several factors," Dr. Hartwell said. "The age of the song, the emotional intensity of the subject matter, the number of times it's been sung in circumstances involving real tragedy, and perhaps most importantly, the circumstances of the performance." She pulled out a thick binder filled with incident reports dating back to the early 1900s. "Wedding performances seem particularly dangerous," she continued. "We think it's because weddings involve heightened emotions, large gatherings of people, and the psychological openness that comes with celebration. People are more susceptible to supernatural influence when they're in elevated emotional states." "What kind of influence?" I asked. Another member of the group, a wedding photographer named David Kim, spoke up. "I've witnessed 3 incidents over the past 10 years, he said. In every case, someone requested a traditional ballad that wasn't on the venue's approved list. In every case, the performer agreed to honor the request despite protocol. And in every case, people disappeared." "Disappeared how?" "Different ways," David said. "Sometimes they'd walk away from the reception and never come back. Sometimes they'd be found days later with no memory of what happened. Once, an entire wedding party vanished for 6 hours and reappeared 30 miles away, all claiming they'd been following a voice they'd heard in the music." Dr. Hartwell nodded. "The pattern is consistent. Certain traditional songs, when performed in emotionally charged environments, seem to open what we might call resonance channels, connections to other states of consciousness. Other times, other places. Other places like where?" I asked. "That depends on the song," she said. "Murder ballads seem to connect to places where violence occurred. Love songs connect to spaces where people experience profound loss. Drowning songs connect to bodies of water," I finished. "Exactly." The group showed me their database of restricted songs. over 200 traditional ballads, folk songs, and spiritual music pieces that had documented histories of supernatural incidents. The list included many songs I'd heard of, some I'd performed before I knew better, and others that were so dangerous they'd been almost completely removed from public knowledge. This is why the venue restrictions exist, Marcus explained. The wedding industry knows about these incidents, even if they don't advertise the fact. Venues that host weddings near water ban drowning songs. Venues with tragic histories ban murder ballads. Places that have experienced disappearances ban songs about lost love. But couples keep requesting them, Dr. Hartwell added, because they're beautiful songs. They're part of our cultural heritage. People want to include family traditions in their weddings, even if those traditions carry risks they don't understand. So what do? I asked. We follow the protocols, Marcus said. We respect the venue restrictions. We educate clients about why certain requests can't be honored. And when something feels wrong during a performance, we stop immediately. What if a client insists? Dr. Hartwell and Marcus exchanged glances. Then you have to decide, Dr. Hartwell said, whether you're willing to risk the consequences of opening a door you might not be able to close. That meeting changed my entire approach to wedding performance. I started studying the restricted song lists like they were sacred texts. I researched the history of every traditional piece I was asked to perform. I became hyper-aware of the atmosphere during performances, watching for signs that something beyond normal musical entertainment was taking place. Most importantly, I learned to trust my instincts when something felt wrong. This knowledge served me well over the next year. I successfully navigated dozens of weddings without incident, gently redirecting clients away from problematic song choices and maintaining the kind of professional reputation that kept the bookings coming. But all of that preparation couldn't protect me from what happened at the Riverside Gardens venue on a rainy October evening. The bride, Morgan, was a music therapist who specialized in traditional healing songs. Her wedding playlist included several folk pieces that were on the borderline of acceptability, sad enough to carry emotional weight, but not quite dangerous enough to be officially banned. The venue was new to our rotation, a restored mansion on the banks of the Willamette River. They had no established restricted song list, which should have been a red flag. Most venues that host weddings develop these policies based on experience. A venue with no restrictions usually means a venue that hasn't been in business long enough to encounter problems, or a venue that hasn't been paying attention. The ceremony and reception proceeded smoothly until the final hour, when Morgan approached our stage with a special request. "Sarah," she said, "I know this is unusual, but I'd like to perform a song myself as the last dance of the evening. It's something I've been working on with my clients, a therapeutic adaptation of a traditional ballad. I think it would be a beautiful way to end the celebration." She handed me a piece of sheet music. The song was titled "The River's Gift," and she'd notated it herself. "I adapted it from an old Appalachian ballad called The Water's Edge," she explained. "I've been using it in my therapy practice to help people process grief related to loss of loved ones. I thought it would be meaningful to perform it here, next to the water." Everything about this request was problematic. A traditional ballad I'd never heard of. A therapeutic adaptation that might have altered the original in unpredictable ways. A performance location directly adjacent to moving water. And a venue with no established safety protocols. But Morgan was a music therapist. This was her professional area. And it was her wedding day. I should have insisted on checking with venue management. I should have contacted Dr. Hartwell to research The Water's Edge. I should have followed every protocol I'd learned. Instead, I agreed to provide piano accompaniment while Morgan performed her adapted version of the song. The moment she began singing, I knew we'd made a mistake. Morgan's voice was beautiful, trained, controlled, and filled with the kind of emotional authenticity that comes from years of using music as a healing tool. But there was something else in her voice, something that suggested the song itself was contributing power that went beyond her individual performance. The ballroom grew quiet in a way that felt different from normal audience appreciation. The silence was complete, absolute, as if the entire room had fallen under a spell. The temperature dropped noticeably, and outside I could hear the river responding. At first, it was just a change in the sound of the water. The normal rush and gurgle of the Willamette became more musical, more structured, as if the river itself was providing orchestration for Morgan's song. Then I began to hear voices in the water. Not clearly at first, just suggestions of harmony, whispers of melody that might have been imagination or acoustic tricks caused by the movement of water over rocks. But as Morgan continued singing, the water voices became more distinct. I could make out individual parts: soprano, alto, tenor, bass. A full choir singing from the river, providing complex harmonies to support Morgan's solo. I looked at our guitarist, who was staring at the windows that faced the water with an expression of growing alarm. The wedding guests were transfixed. They stood motionless, listening to Morgan's performance with the kind of absolute attention that suggested something beyond normal musical appreciation. Some of them were crying. Not the happy tears you sometimes see at weddings, but genuine grief, the kind of deep, cleansing sorrow that comes from confronting real loss. And some of them were moving, not dancing, walking, slow, purposeful steps toward the windows that faced the river, as if they were answering a call they could hear in the music. I caught the guitarist's eye and nodded toward the guests who were walking toward the water. He immediately stopped playing. The moment the guitar accompaniment ceased, the spell broke. Morgan stopped singing, confused by the sudden silence. The water voices faded. The guests blinked and shook their heads as if waking from a dream. And several of them were standing at the windows, their hands pressed against the glass, staring out at the dark water with expressions of longing that was painful to witness. "What happened?" Morgan asked. "Why did you stop?" Before I could answer, the venue coordinator appeared at our side. James Morrison, a nervous young man who'd recently taken over management of Riverside Gardens. "What song was that?" he asked urgently. Morgan showed him her sheet music. His face went pale as he read the title. "Where did you get this?" "I adapted it from a traditional ballad," Morgan said, "for my therapy practice." "What was the original called?" "The Water's Edge." "Why? What's wrong?" James looked around the room at the guests who were still standing by the windows, then back at Morgan. "Because 6 people drowned in this river last year," he said quietly. "And they were all last seen walking toward the water after attending a folk music concert where someone performed a song called The Water's Edge." The color drained from Morgan's face. That's impossible. I've been using this song in therapy for months. It helps people process grief." "Maybe it helps too much," James said. "Maybe it opens doors that are supposed to stay closed." He gestured toward the guests at the windows. "Look at them. Look at their faces. Does that look like healthy grief processing to you?" He was right. The people standing by the windows weren't exhibiting the kind of cathartic emotional release you might see in a therapy session. They looked lost, entranced, as if they were still listening to voices that no one else could hear. It took nearly an hour to get all the guests away from the windows and safely return to their cars. Morgan was devastated, convinced that her attempt to share her therapeutic work had somehow endangered her own wedding guests. The incident was quietly covered up. No media attention, no police investigation. Just another strange event that the wedding industry would prefer to forget. But for me, it was the final confirmation that I was working in a profession that carried risks I was only beginning to understand. I spent the next several months diving deeper into the research. I studied every incident report Dr. Hartwell's group had compiled. I interviewed other wedding performers who'd experienced supernatural phenomena. I learned about the historical connections between music, emotional trauma, and unexplained disappearances. What I discovered was both fascinating and terrifying. Traditional ballads, particularly those dealing with death and loss, appear to function as more than just entertainment. They're repositories of collective emotional experience, carrying the accumulated grief and longing of everyone who's ever sung them. Under the right circumstances, emotional gatherings, specific locations, performers with the right vocal qualities, these songs can apparently create what researchers call resonance events. Moments when the emotional weight of the music becomes so intense that it opens connections to other states of consciousness. Sometimes these connections are harmless. People cry, they feel moved, they experience cathartic emotional release. Sometimes they're dangerous. People disappear. They follow voices only they can hear. They make choices that put them in lethal situations. And sometimes the connections work both ways. Sometimes, whatever exists in those other states of consciousness finds a way to reach back. I learned this firsthand 3 months ago, during what should have been a routine wedding at the historic Evergreen Estate. The bride, Rachel, was a conservatory-trained soprano who'd requested a program of classical art songs and carefully selected traditional pieces. Everything on her playlist had been approved by venue management and cross-referenced against our safety database. It should have been a perfect performance. The ceremony was flawless. The cocktail hour was elegant. Dinner service was smooth. But during the dancing portion of the evening, I began to notice someone in the crowd who didn't belong. She was standing at the back of the ballroom, partially hidden by a decorative pillar. A young woman in a 1920s-style dress, with long dark hair and pale skin that seemed to glow with its own light. She was beautiful, but there was something wrong with her presence. She stood too still. She watched too intently, and none of the other guests seemed to see her. At first, I thought she might be a wedding crasher, someone who'd wandered in from another event. But as the evening progressed, I realized she was watching me specifically. Every time I looked in her direction, our eyes would meet, and she would smile with an expression that was both grateful and infinitely sad. During a break between sets, I asked Marcus if he'd noticed the woman by the pillar. "What woman?" he asked, looking where I pointed. "The one in the vintage dress. Dark hair." Marcus scanned the area carefully. "I don't see anyone matching that description." But I could see her clearly. And as I watched, she began to move toward the stage. She walked with the fluid grace of someone who wasn't entirely bound by physical laws. Her feet didn't quite seem to touch the floor, and she passed through other guests as if they weren't there. When she reached the edge of the stage area, she looked up at me and spoke. I couldn't hear her words over the ambient noise of the reception, but I could read her lips. "Thank you for not singing my song." Then she smiled one more time and faded away like morning mist. That night, after the wedding, I researched the history of the historic Evergreen estate. What I found explained everything. In 1923, a young woman named Catherine Mills had died at the estate during her own wedding reception. She'd requested that the hired musicians perform a traditional ballad called The Lover's Return, a song about a woman who dies waiting for her beloved to come back from war. The song was performed as requested. Catherine danced to it with her new husband. And halfway through the dance, she collapsed and died of apparent heart failure, despite being young and healthy. The estate had been adding traditional ballads to their restricted song list ever since. Catherine Mills had been thanking me for following the safety protocols that might have prevented her own death nearly a century ago. For not singing the song that had somehow called her across the divide between life and death on her wedding day. For helping to keep other brides safe from the same fate that had claimed her. That encounter changed my perspective on this work entirely. The safety protocols we follow, the venue restrictions we respect, the traditional songs we avoid, they're not just policies designed to prevent awkward situations. They're protective measures against forces that have been claiming lives for as long as people have been singing about loss, longing, and the space between what is and what might have been. Understanding that responsibility has made me a better performer and a more careful guardian of traditions that are both beautiful and dangerous. It's also made me realize that this job involves more than entertaining wedding guests. Sometimes we're protecting the living from the power of songs that have absorbed too much death. Sometimes we're helping the dead find peace by refusing to give them a voice. And sometimes we're the only thing standing between a happy celebration and a tragedy that won't be fully understood until it's too late to prevent. If you're thinking about taking this job, you should know what you're really signing up for. Yes, you'll sing at beautiful venues for happy couples on the most important day of their lives. But you'll also carry the responsibility of knowing which songs can kill, which melodies can call the dead, and which requests should never be honored no matter how much the client insists. You'll learn to read rooms for more than just musical preferences. You'll develop instincts about when a performance is moving beyond entertainment into something potentially dangerous. And you'll carry the weight of stories like mine, incidents that can never be fully explained, experiences that challenge everything you thought you knew about the relationship between music and reality. The pay is good. The work can be deeply fulfilling. And most of the time, you'll go home with nothing more dramatic than a hoarse voice and the satisfaction of helping people celebrate love. But sometimes you'll encounter the other side of this profession. The side that deals with songs that remember too much, voices that answer from beyond the grave, and the thin line between honoring tradition and opening doors that should stay closed. If you can handle that responsibility, welcome to the wedding music industry. If you can't, you might want to consider a different line of work. Because once you've heard a song call back to the dead, it's impossible to forget that music has power beyond anything we fully understand. And some songs, no matter how beautiful, should never be sung at weddings. Trust me on that one.